Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for this session, Kitten Season Survival Guide, your roadmap to expanding kitten lifesaving. My name is Alesha Davidson and I am with Best Friends as a strategist in our Pacific region.
Hi everyone, nice to see you all here. My name is Leah Long and I am the Regional Senior Specialist on our South Central team.
One of the most effective ways that we can save kittens in shelters is through diversion programming. And I want to start there because I know sometimes when we talk about intake diversion programming, sometimes people get a little bit nervous because it can kind of be a little bit of a scary topic depending on what you've heard or what your experiences are. So I kind of want to start and get to know you all a little bit. Is there anyone here who is in that boat where intake diversion makes you a little bit nervous to talk about?
Yeah.
Okay, a few people, not too many. Is there anyone that feels super confident in intake diversion?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. If you just raised your hand previously, these are the people you want to talk to. But it's about changing our mindset about what intake diversion really is, because a lot of times people think it's about saying no to taking animals in, and that's not what it is, right? Instead, it's about saying, let's hit the brakes, let's pause and have a conversation, and let's talk about what our options are first and foremost before we make any decisions. Because typically we tend to have a lot more options than we think we do, rather than just having to take the animal in. And so we really want to have a conversation-based approach at our intake counters. Any place that we're having any kind of conversations about kittens, a conversation-based approach. And that's because kittens are so vulnerable, and so we really need to find better solutions for them. And so the best way that we can divert kittens is to either keep them in the community with mom, or at least give mom a chance to come back and find them, or by diverting them directly into a foster home, preferably with the finder because they're our point of contact at this point. And so we really want to have transparent conversations about why kittens don't belong in shelters, and really have a community-focused solution here. And we do this because we know kittens are one of the most vulnerable populations that we're solving for. Our bottle babies that require around-the-clock care with constant heat source needs, they need to be fed every couple of hours, they need to be stimulated. That's just not something that we can provide typically in a shelter environment because we just don't have the time and we don't have the staff. And even for our weaned babies, they're still so vulnerable. They're exposed to so much in a shelter environment that it's just not great for their developing immune systems, and we don't really have a lot of socialization opportunities for them in a shelter. So we really want to make sure we're encouraging the community to help us find better solutions for them. And we do that by shifting our conversations so that we're providing resources and, again, having those conversations. So again, we want to be really transparent. We want to be really open about the things that we're going to talk about today about why kittens don't belong and the process of how we can divert them, and encourage people to step up to help. And so there are three main pieces to the diversion puzzle for kittens. The first, of course, is the active diversion itself. Again, it's the information gathering, it's that conversation. And it's not just a retraining of ourselves and how we have those conversations, but also a retraining of our community. Because if we think about it, for decades, our communities have heard that all they need to do when they find a lost animal is bring them to the shelter and we'll take it from there. And that is simply just not the case. We just don't have the capacity to handle that many animals. We never have, because if we did, we wouldn't be where we are now. And so we want to make sure that we're having those conversations and we're having a little bit more patience, because it can take a long time for people when it's the first time that they're hearing about this. It's a new concept, and to some it can be scary. So we do want to make sure that we're coming, again, very conversation-based, very non-judgmental, and offering resources and support. The second piece is going to be the finder to foster programming. So in cases where diversion is just not going to be possible, whether that's because mom's not there, the kitten's not healthy, or some other factor, we're going to want to talk to that person that found those kittens about becoming a foster. So this is going to be a little bit uncomfortable for some people because it's kind of a turning of the tables, right? They came to us for help and now we're asking them for help. And so for some people that's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, either for the staff member or for the patron who's being asked for help. But again, providing support and resources, having that conversation is going to get you through that process. And then the last piece, last but not least, is going to be focused, targeted, focused, trap, neuter, vaccinate, and return, to provide what Leah has coined as the friends and family plan, because we know that where there are kittens, there are breeding cats. And so we want to make sure that we're looking at where we're receiving kittens from in the community so that we can use our limited sterilization services to provide services to those areas so we don't keep getting kittens in from those locations.
All right, so the first section of this presentation is going to talk all about how to assess whether or not kittens should be returned back home with mom, because as we know, no one can care for healthy kittens better than their moms can. So whenever we can have them go back outside with mom, that's what we want to do. And so this all goes back to having a conversation. At the end of the day, these people brought us these kittens out of compassion. They did not have to come to the shelter with these kittens. They could have drove off to the local park and left them there. They could have done a whole number of things, but they brought them to us because they have been trained that if I want to help these kittens, I need to bring them to the shelter. And so it's really important that we have these conversations, working with that compassion, but also talking them through what's going on with these kittens so that they can see that the best outcome might not be the one that they originally had in mind, which is being taken into the shelter. And so in order to assess what type of pathway planning we're aiming for in this conversation, we first need to assess the kittens themselves. And so there's 3 components to assessing these kittens, whether they're right in front of us or we're walking someone through this on the phone. The first thing is assessing the kittens themselves, their age, their health, assessing the location, specifically the safety of the location, and then assessing the situation as a whole, really getting into what's going on with mom cat. So we're going to go into each one of these steps of assessing kittens under the age of 8 weeks old. On the screen right now, you can see an example of an assessment guide. I love assessment guides. I want it at my front desk. I want it on my website. I want it on my officer's truck, because the more I make this information accessible to the public, the more normalized this information will become. And this really walks people through how to assess if the kittens should come into your local shelter or rescue and need human support versus if they should stay outside with mom. What I really like about this is it does also get into aging with pictures, but it doesn't focus on weight for aging kittens, because with kittens, weight can be pretty unreliable, especially if they're living outside. So instead, it's focusing on eye development, teeth development, ear development, and mobility development, which are going to be much more consistent milestones. And I need to know the age of the kittens because first of all, I need to know if they're under or over 8 weeks old, because if they're over 8 weeks old, they might qualify for our community cat program. They might be big enough to be sterilized. If they're under 8 weeks old and they're being returned back with mom, I need to know how old they are, because I want them to come back in to get sterilized once they're big enough. And if they're going to foster, I need to know how old they are, because I need to be able to detail the level of care, what type of care the foster parent will be giving those kittens. But even more important than aging is assessing health. When I'm looking at a healthy kitten, I want them to be warm to the touch. I want them to be reactive when I touch them. I don't want to see any clear signs of illness or injury. They're healthy, in good body condition. They're going to be pretty clean, because mom does a good job of cleaning the kittens and her nest. And I might even take 2 fingers, touch the kitten's belly, and feel that it's full and firm if they've been fed recently. And if I am doing this in front of this person, I am going to have them do it with me. I'm going to be like, does that kitten feel warm to you? They're going to be like, yeah, it does. Does that kitten's belly feel full and firm? And they're going to be like, yes. And I can explain why as I am having them do this, but I'm involving them in the process, which makes them involved in my decision making. I'm also asking them low stakes questions that get them in the rhythm of agreeing with what I'm saying. So if I have to make a bigger ask, like returning the kittens or becoming a foster parent, I already have them in basically a rhythm where they're already starting to agree with me before I reach that bigger ask. On the flip side, if the kittens are cold, if they are not reacting to me touching them, if there are signs of sickness or injury, if they are dirty and unkept, these are signs that the kittens aren't thriving in their environment, in which case we don't want to return the kittens where they're not thriving, and we are going to move to a finder to foster conversation. But let's say the kittens are healthy. The next thing that I'm going to be looking at is assessing the location. And I'm going to be asking myself, is this location safe? If it's not safe, can I make changes to make it safe? And so generally speaking, their answer is going to fall into one of 3 categories. The first is, it's your typical backyard, front yard. There's really nothing they're concerned about in the environment. There's nothing I'm concerned about when I'm talking to them. So there's no reason I can't move on to the next step of the assessment. The next answer is something like, I found the kittens in a backyard, but my dog has access to the backyard, and I'm afraid that they're going to get to the kittens. Or I found these kittens on a sidewalk, and I'm afraid that someone's going to step on them. These are valid concerns, but there are also concerns that I can address by saying, okay, your dogs have access to the backyard, but not the front yard. Let's move the kittens to the front yard. Or your neighbor feeds the outdoor cats in the community. Why don't we talk to her and see if we can move them to her yard next door? And in the case of a sidewalk, let's move the kittens off of a sidewalk under a nearby sheltered area. Mom has a strong sense of smell. Cats do, even if they don't get the same credit as dogs do. And also, as the kittens get hungry, they're gonna start to cry. As long as they are moved nearby, mom will be able to locate them. It's a common rumor that mom won't care for the kittens if she smells humans on them. That is not true. She does not care if they have been handled by people. The last type of location would be something like, I found the kittens in a box next to the highway. I'm not gonna tell people to return the kittens in a box next to the highway. For one thing, there's not a lot of things I can do to make it safe. Also, there are very clear signs that the kittens weren't from that location originally, in which case we'd move on to that finder to foster conversation. Let's say the kittens are healthy, the location is safe, or I can make it safe. We're gonna move on to the last portion of assessing the kittens, and that's the situation, where I'm gonna ask, have you seen mom recently? And because we are doing things in threes, their answer tends to fall into one of three categories. The first one is, yes, I have. And I'm like, that's fantastic. These kittens are gonna go back if I have anything to say about it, because they are healthy and this location is safe. The next answer is something along the lines of, I'm not sure, or I don't know. And in that case, I'm gonna ask if they see other cats in the area. If I have healthy kittens and they see other cats in the area, it is likely that mom is one of those cats. But if they aren't sure, it shocks me that not everyone is like cataloging all the cats like I do in the neighborhood, but it does happen. If they are still uncertain and there's just that sense of uncertainty, what we can tell people to do is bring the kittens back if they're healthy and the location is good, and wait 12 hours to see if there are signs that mom has returned. They may not necessarily see mom, because mom might not want to be around people, and we'll talk about this in just a few slides, but if mom is coming back, we're going to see in those 12 hours that health is continuing to stay the same, and we'll see signs that mom is coming back to feed the kittens. If the kittens are under the ages of 4 to 3 weeks old and they are not mobile yet, you can also put a ring of flour around the kittens and see paw prints of mom coming and going. The most important thing is not to hover, because if this person is hovering over the kittens, mom is not going to return. So they need to go like back in their house and check periodically. If in that 12 hours the kittens start to decline in any way, or they start crying like nonstop, it's normal for kittens to cry, but not for like hours on end. If we're seeing that, that's a sign for them to call us back up and come back to the shelter and us figure out some foster support for them. The last type of answer to this question is that they have seen mom, but unfortunately she is deceased, ill, or injured. In these situations, we can't return the kittens back. And we turn to that finder to foster conversation. If mom is still alive, we would work with them to trap mom and get her whatever type of medical care that she needs. So there are some other questions and information that we need throughout this conversation. I always lead a conversation with getting someone's address first and foremost. I make it a policy to get their license or a form of ID, but it's important to note that that's not always where the kittens came from. It could have came from their place of work, or they have an expired identification. So we do want to verbalize that, where that address is, because that is a very important data point for that future focused TNBR efforts. And we want to ask other questions to help with our future efforts in that area as well, such as how many cats are there in the area? Are you seeing other litters of kittens? Do you know who the caregiver is? Because if we're going to trap there, we want to work with a caregiver. Are the cats creating any nuisances in the area? And all of these questions and information will help us when we put future resources there to prevent future intakes beyond this conversation. So, after we have assessed the kittens, and in the situation where we have assessed that they can definitely go back, it's really important that we take our time with these conversations and really inform them of why we have come to this determination. And that's why it's important to involve them in that assessment process, because I want them to fully understand that we care about these kittens too. We want the best possible outcome for them. And if I have a healthy kitten and that needs around-the-clock care, that has an immune system that isn't fully developed, I want them to stay with mom and bring them back once they're all big enough to get sterilized together. And so I'm really gonna walk them through why we've come to this determination and talk through any questions and concerns that they have and really work once again with that compassion to like this outcome that makes the most sense for these kittens in front of us. As an industry, we have often been in a position where we react to animals coming into us just historically. And so when we're just reacting to animals coming in, that means we quickly get overcrowded. And with overcrowding comes longer length of stay, which means more chances of behavior deterioration, higher likelihood of illness, which also means all of our resources are stretched very thin throughout our various departments. It means our staff get very stressed, compassion fatigue, turnover. And this kind of reactionary model that we used to have, it doesn't benefit our staff, it doesn't benefit the cats, and it doesn't benefit our community. And so as an industry, we have been moving more and more towards more proactive programming, which kitten intake diversion is part of. And a really big part of intake diversion programming is to cultivate resources to fill in the resource and informational gaps that are present in our communities that are leading to intakes in the first place. And so when it comes to kitten programs, this means information on what you should do to find kittens. You want that out in the community and accessible. It means sterilization resources to get the cats fixed. And it means foster supplies to support our foster parents. Another important thing is just messaging. Like Alesha talked about, we're retraining people's response. And so if I call up a shelter and like Samantha answers the phone, and she's like, "You got kittens? That's so cute. Just bring them in, we'll get them adopted, it's all fine." And then they come to the shelter and like David's working the front desk and he's assessing the kittens and he's like, "Actually, these kittens are healthy. We really want them to go back with mom," and hitting all those talking points we talked about. If I am that person and I have gotten two contradicting concepts from the same organization, I am going to want to go with the concept that I am more familiar with. And it's going to make that conversation about returning those kittens back with mom much more difficult because they have gotten competing ideas from the same group. So it's really important that everyone on our team, from volunteers to dispatch to officers to our front desk staff, and anyone we're partnering with is really saying the same thing so that we can further normalize this concept. With that idea in mind, we want to make information accessible. When someone's unsure about what to do, the first thing they usually do is go to the internet. And because we're their local animal welfare organization, we're often going to be one of the first things that pop up. And so having a page dedicated to found kittens with all the information someone needs if they find kittens outside, what are the steps they should take, can be a really useful tool, making it so people don't have to come into the shelter at all in order to determine that these kittens are actually safe with mom and waiting until they're big enough to contact us about getting everyone fixed. Similarly, most people are on some form of social media, whether that is Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, probably some other ones that are new and up and coming. And this is where a lot of people are getting their information from. It's where a lot of people are learning. And so we really want to make sure that we're utilizing these different outlets of information and pushing information about what people should be doing when they find kittens. So once again, they have so many different avenues to get that information, and it is becoming a normal concept of, this is what I do when I find an outdoor kitten. So there are some common concerns that come up when it comes to kitten intake diversion. The first one is, if bottle babies need to be fed every couple of hours, how can I leave these kittens outside for up to 12 hours? And so the first thing I'm going to say is, this is only for healthy kittens. And with our healthy kittens, what we know is that mom's milk has a higher nutritional value than milk replacement does. So they can go longer in between feedings with mom than with a milk replacement. Additionally, the kittens are used to being fed in a more inconsistent schedule, unlike with a bottle feeder. And so mainly it's because of the higher nutritional value, but due to it being mom and mom providing all that great care, they can go longer when it is healthy kittens. Another question that I'm asked is, why would mom abandon these kittens in the first place? Why would she leave them alone? And so likely she has not abandoned them at all. The first reason why you may not be seeing mom around these kittens is because of you. Cats are mesopredators. They are preyed on by bigger predators. People are bigger predators. So if they see you hanging around their nest, they are not going to want to attract attention to it or they also just may not be socialized to people as well. And so for these reasons, they are unlikely to want to approach the nest as long as they see you around. And one thing I can promise you is that mom will see you long before you see her. And if she does not want you to see her, you are not going to see her. And so she's likely just hanging around, staring you down, being like, go away, and thinking about that. Another reason why you might not see mom is that in order to feed the kittens, she needs to eat too. So she just might be going to your local community cat caregiver, getting a good lunch before heading back to her kittens. Another thing that comes up is when someone finds a single kitten by themselves, they're concerned that that single kitten has been abandoned. With our healthy single kittens, what is likely happening is mom periodically moves her nest, once again to shake any predators off of her tail. And so she wants to keep her kittens safe, so she's moving her nest, and she can only do that one kitten at a time. So if you have come across a healthy single kitten, you've likely just interrupted her in that moving process, and the best thing you can do is go back in your house and then check again a few hours later. The last question that comes up is, what if we have room for kittens and adoptions? Well, even if we have room, that does not change the level of care the kittens need and their underdeveloped immune systems. Additionally, mom can teach kittens how to cat much better than we can, and so we want to try and keep kittens with mom when they're under 8 weeks old for all of these reasons. Additionally, adoption and foster are resources, and like any resources, they are limited. As much as I wish I could have unlimited adoptions week in and week out, that is not the case. And so I want to maximize my resources, in this case foster and adoption, for kittens that do need human intervention in order to thrive, for owner surrenders that don't have another option, and for like hoarding case cats. These are all cats where there isn't another option, whereas these kittens can go back outside with mom. Lastly, if you do have room in cat adoptions for a prolonged period of time, first of all, congratulations, that's fantastic. But in those instances, that's a really great opportunity to be able to help neighboring shelters and communities that are still struggling with their cat population, which really allows us to save as many lives as possible.
All right, quick quiz time as we kind of hit the midway point. Don't worry, it's gonna be really easy. We've talked a lot about keeping kittens with mom because that's gonna be the best care that they receive. But let's say we have a situation like this. We have a constituent who knows that they found kittens, they're pretty concerned about keeping the kittens outside, and they know mom is around, and they feel pretty confident that they can trap her and bring her into us. So when we're kind of faced with this and they're offering to do this, we have two options, right? We can either bring mom and the kittens in together like they're suggesting, and the kittens will be fine because mom's providing care, she'll be with them, we don't have to worry about our limited bottle feeding resources and all of that. Or we can go with option B and continue to divert these kittens, and when everyone is old enough for sterilization, we can arrange for surgery services so that mom and kittens can both be fixed. So if you want to go with option A, raise your hand. I'm not surprised. If you'd rather go with option B, please raise your hand. Thank you.
It's like you guys sensed a theme.
Yeah, you all get gold stars. Pretty obvious, right? But there's reasons here, right? And this is something that we want to explain to people when they offer this, is that shelters are stressful environments, not just for kittens, but also for mom, especially our under-socialized moms. They have a really hard time, even if they're in a foster home, it's gonna be really stressful for them. And mom cats can actually produce a stress hormone called cortisol that gets passed along in their breast milk that can still get passed along to the kittens and affect their developing immune systems. And just in general, we have better options than to put these animals through this stress. Now, sometimes when we talk about keeping kittens with mom, but we don't have mom, the topic of surrogate mothers comes up. And so we do want to kind of talk about that because there are certainly pros and cons to that. And it's something where we want to balance the risk with the reward. Now, keeping the kittens with a mom of any kind, of course, does have the pros of the superior nutrition of mom's milk and the increased socialization opportunities, but we do run the risk of potential spread of disease, and that's gonna be the biggest risk we wanna take into consideration because it's the last thing that anybody wants, right? And so that's something that we always wanna go with diversion first and then finder to foster programming, but in cases where we don't have those options for whatever reason, and we have a surrogate mom, and our only other option is to euthanize those kittens, and you want to try a surrogate mother and you want to try to mix those litters, you can go for it, but you want to do so in the safest way possible. Meaning we want to pick a safe mom, so preferably a mom that's been in a foster home for about a week or so where we've been able to monitor her health and make sure that she's not presenting any signs of illness. Preferably we want to pick a mom that doesn't have her kittens any longer, but we do also want to take into consideration the fact that she's been nursing. We don't want to keep her nursing for too long because that's just not fair to her either. And we do want to make sure that in cases where we're concerned about things like FELV, which we probably wouldn't be if we're picking the safest mom, but you might want to consider testing for FELV. And you will very rarely ever hear me say that because those tests are so inconclusive, but that's a conversation for another day. But in these cases, you may want to do it just to kind of rule it out because kittens are so susceptible to that disease. And so you want to make sure that you're kind of picking the safest mom, and then if you are moving forward with any kind of mixing practice, that you are monitoring things like disease spread, any kind of euthanasia decisions, any kind of illness, any of those things that might show that your mixing practice needs to be reevaluated if it's giving you some negative outcomes.
All right, we are on to our next section of diversion, which is finder to foster. So we've talked all about how to assess if kittens can go back outside with mom, but as we covered, there are going to be different situations where it is clear that human intervention is needed, in which case the first thing that we want to do is talk to the person who found these kittens about fostering them, because if they already have an investment in these kittens. We talked about it. They brought them to us because they care about these kittens to one extent or another. And so we want to utilize that compassion to work towards that common goal of providing the support that these kittens need. And so it goes back first to our tried and true talking points. In order for someone to agree to foster, especially when it's unexpected, understanding the why is really important. We want to explain how kittens are vulnerable in shelter environments. We want to explain that they are not going to be able to receive the level of care they need in a shelter environment, and that really the best thing that we can do for these kittens that they have found and brought to us is to get them into a foster home. And so when we are talking to someone about becoming a foster parent, one of the biggest things about human beings is that we often fear unknowns. When we don't know what to expect, we are a lot more likely to say no or back out of that question or that situation. So it's really on us to make it not feel like an unknown. We want to fill in any of the blanks in their mind and potential concerns by really walking them through what being a foster parent looks like with your organization, what type of support that they can expect when it comes to onboarding information, when it comes to foster resources, when it comes to medical care if the kittens need them. We really want them to feel secure in that decision of supporting us and supporting these kittens by fostering with us. Another thing when it comes to expectations is if someone agrees to foster with us, we do want them to know when they are going to be coming back, whether that's for boosters or if that's for sterilization surgery. Because the last thing that we want is for multiple foster parents to be bringing litters of kittens back like on a Friday afternoon when there's not a lot we can be doing, which I speak from personal experience on that. So it's a lot easier if we try to work within our flow of our shelter environment. So if I have my vet in on Wednesdays doing surgeries, I likely want my foster parent to bring those kittens in on a Tuesday or that Wednesday morning. If we know that we're gonna have time to do a bunch of boosters on like a Thursday, then I'm gonna schedule them to come in on a Thursday. And this also allows them to plan ahead of time. This is the date that I am coming back to the shelter, which makes it a lot more likely for us to have that consistent follow through when it comes to having our fosters come back for boosters and for sterilization. Not everyone is going to be able to foster, but the conversation does not end there. We as a shelter or a rescue group or any type of animal welfare organization have a network, a base of people that we regularly interact with. That's fantastic. But I want my base to continue to grow. I want my network to continue to grow, and every single person that walks in through my door has their own network of people. They have friends, they have family members, colleagues, neighbors, different community and civic groups that they are a part of that I might not have ever had access to if that person didn't walk through the door today. And so I really want to utilize that network So before they leave through the door, I'm going to talk about still this need for foster parents and how they can help us find that foster. I'm going to ask them to take a picture of those kittens. I'm going to ask them to post it to whatever social media platforms they use. And I'm going to ask them to share it with all those different members of the network so that we get more people involved. Before they leave, I'm going to make sure that they know if they get someone who's interested in fostering, where they should go, like who they should contact to get a quick answer, whether that's our foster coordinator, whoever it is that's going to be on staff taking those emails or that call that day. I want them to have that really clear answer. Lastly, I want them to know what timeline we are working with. If I have a one-day-old kitten come into the shelter and I know that I need to find a foster home for that kitten before the end of the day, I need to communicate that to the person. One, so that there's not any future misunderstandings, but also I want that member of our community working with that same urgency towards our mutual goal to find a foster parent for that kitten. And so communicating what we're working with, why we need to find a foster parent quickly, and what the next steps look like will help us in getting more fosters to support these kittens that are so vulnerable.
Oops, sorry, it's okay. All right, so as we're kind of shifting in these conversations, the question that can sometimes come up is, can we still provide a positive client service experience? Because I'm sure a lot of us have been there, or we've heard the stories that when we start to do intake diversion or we manage intake, there then comes feedback of, well, you're not doing your job, and it's your job to take this animal, and you're not helping me, right? And that's obviously not our goal. That's not what we're trying to do. And so there is a balance that we can find, and you can absolutely provide a good client service experience while still diverting animals from coming into your shelter. Now, first and foremost, keep to your basics of client service, right? Smile, use people's names, say thank you, acknowledge them at the first opportunity that you can, all of the basic stuff that you learned in retail. But we can go a little bit further when we're talking about intake diversion. And the first thing that we can do is be very intentional with our request. Again, we don't want to hint. We don't want to have people kind of guess at what we're trying to ask them. We want to be very specific and transparent with people, because if they don't know that we're asking them to help, then they're not going to know that they need to step up to help. There's a big difference between taking in kittens and just kind of hinting well, we'll have to find a foster for them, versus, hey, these kittens don't belong in this shelter because X, Y, Z. Would you be willing to step up and foster them? People are going to be a lot more receptive to a direct request. And on the other hand, when we make that direct request, we also want to make sure we're not saying no for that person. That's something that I see a lot. And there's kind of two things that are at play, right? Because we operate by social norms, the general guidelines that you don't want to make people uncomfortable. And if you don't make me uncomfortable, I'm not going to make you uncomfortable. And also, too, the fear of rejection. Getting a no sucks, right? Nobody likes being told no. And so sometimes, because we're fighting against that and we're trying to avoid those things, we say no for that person. And so what ends up happening is we're having this conversation, and I've observed staff members do this plenty of times, where they will ask that finder if they'll hold on to the animal, and that finder just gets a deer in headlights look, because this wasn't what they were expecting us to ask them, right? Again, they thought we were just going to take the animal from them. And so they hesitate. And in that moment of hesitation, the staff member interprets it as, oh, they're going to say no, so I need to break up with them first, right? I need to say no for them. And so they just kind of go, oh, no, it's fine. We'll figure something out. And then that person didn't even say anything, and we had a whole conversation with no words. And that's kind of cutting us off before we can stand, right? And so we want to make sure that we give people the time to think, because when I think about situations where I've had to think about if I can foster or hold on to an animal, I have a whole checklist up in my head, right? First and foremost, I got to think about my pets. Can I keep them safe, and can I keep them isolated from this pet for potential disease or behavioral issues? I have a small child in my home. She's 5. Last winter, I brought home a ringworm kitten unknowingly, and she caught ringworm. And I thought I had ruined her kindergarten social life by making her ringworm girl. I don't want to do that. She was fine, everything was great, but I don't want to do that again, right? So I'm going to be a little bit more mindful about in the future. I have my boyfriend. I have to think about, is he going to be okay with me bringing an animal home? He's not going to tell me no. I know that already, but I still have to ask. And so those are things that people are going to have to kind of think about for themselves, and it's going to look a little bit different for everybody in this situation. And they may also have to make a couple of phone calls. And like Leah said, we want to be clear about what the timeline is of when we need to know if we have a foster, but we need to give them some time to kind of go through that process themselves. And so sometimes that does mean we're gonna have to sit in the silence, which can be uncomfortable, but we can use that to our advantage. So instead of just kind of sitting there and just staring at each other awkwardly, we can use that time to remind them of all the support that they'll receive. So, hey, we can get you an appointment to bring them in for boosters or to bring them back for adoption. We'll provide all the medical, we'll provide you all the supplies, we're here for you, whatever it happens to be. And through that, you're kind of answering some questions that they may have, they just haven't asked yet, and you're taking advantage of that silence. Other tips, we want to avoid assumptions. I know it's very easy for us to get a little bit jaded, especially when we hear no a lot. And a lot of us have been in this for a long time, and we've had these conversations and we get a bit tired. And that's okay, that's normal. But we do want to kind of try to come in as fresh as possible to every conversation, because like every animal, every situation and every case is going to be different. So we do want to make sure that we're offering people the opportunity to help and not just kind of prejudging based off of past experience. We also want to make sure that we're empathizing and offering resources. I don't know how many times I'll say offer resources, but I'll say it every time, because that's the best thing that we can do for these people. And in the cases of, specifically, I'm thinking of people who have to put the kittens back. That's a really scary experience for some of them, right? If this is the first time they're hearing that, and we know how little kittens are, right? Like, you hold them in the palm of your hand and they're being told to put them back outside. That's scary for people sometimes. And so it's totally valid for us to empathize with that and just say, hey, it's okay that you feel that way, but here's why this is the best thing for them, and we're gonna walk you through the process so you know what to do, and you know what to do if we don't see mom again, right? And if we're dealing with people who are experiencing very heightened emotions, they're up here, the best thing we can do is lead by listening instead of lead by trying to educate. Because if they're up here, they're not listening to you. They are not gonna process anything that you're sharing with them. They're just too emotional in that moment, no matter what the emotion is. It could be anger, it could be concern, fear, whatever. And so what we want to do is let them talk, let them vent it out a little bit. And yes, this takes some time, but if we think about all of the time it takes to intake those kittens, provide the medical, find a foster, do the socialization, do the adoption, all of those things that we would have to do on our own, this really does benefit us and save us time in the long run. And so we want to make sure that we can let them talk. And when we let them talk and we listen to them, we can figure out what their real concern is. Because sometimes people will make a mile-long list of what their concerns are, but there's usually a root cause that we can talk to them about. And the longer we let them talk and the more we listen to them, the more we figure out what that is to bring them down a few notches so we can provide resources. And in cases where they're just not coming down and they're just not getting on board, something that we need to remember is that you all here are the experts. And if you don't feel like an expert, you're working to become an expert because you're at a conference like this and you're pursuing educational experiences. And your expertise is what dictates your policies and procedures. That's how you make your decisions. And the public, as much as we love them and as much as we rely on them for support and help, they don't have the same expertise that you do. And so they shouldn't be allowed to dictate your policies. They're not out there telling the police what to do or the fire department or even the DMV. And so the same should go for your department as well. Now, kitten kits are going to be the best support that you can offer people that are going to become fosters for you. Having them pre-assembled is going to be the best thing that you can do for yourself, because there's nothing worse than having a new foster come in and you're scrambling trying to find bottles because you can't find them and they're locked in a box somewhere in a cupboard that you don't even realize, and you're just trying to get everything quickly to get them out. So having them pre-assembled is going to be really helpful for you. And as far as where to have them, at anywhere you're having a conversation about kittens, right? So intake counters are pretty obvious. But your animal control officer trucks are really helpful too. If your ACOs are having conversations with members of the public about kittens, they should have kitten kits on board so that they can offer those resources to people to keep those kittens out of the shelter and not have to bring them in. As far as what goes into a kitten kit, it's pretty standard. We're gonna be focused on our food source and our heat source. So food source is gonna depend on the age, of course, the formula, canned cat food, kitten kibble. If you have formula, you're gonna wanna have bottles, syringes, maybe something to clean the bottles with, like those scrubber brushes. And then a heat source. It doesn't really matter what the heat source is, they all get the job done. But the most important thing about a heat source is to remind people that they need to monitor that heat source. If it's microwavable, it's going to have to be re-microwaved later. If it's an electric heating pad, it might have an auto shut-off feature that we're not aware of. So we wanna make sure we're keeping that stuff in mind. Other miscellaneous supplies, I'm a huge fan of sending people with kitchen scales so they can monitor the weight of kittens so that we can track that before it gets worse and try to identify potential health issues before they develop into issues that we can't save them from. Other things that are really helpful, tissues, baby wipes, people like blankets and stuffed animals for comfort items, sometimes toothbrushes for grooming. All of that is kind of up to you. As long as you get the main primary sources taken care of, you're going to be set. But the best thing you can do is put all of these things on your Amazon wish list so that the community knows that you need these items. There's nothing better than a donor likes than to know what they're specifically donating for. So if they know that they just bought 2 heating discs to save 2 litters of kittens, that's going to really go a long way with them. So being very specific in your pleas, explaining why you need these items, and then putting them on your wish list is going to be really helpful for you. And for those finders that become fosters, we want to make sure that they're getting a proper onboarding process. This is really important, and Leah talked about this a little bit, right? We want to identify who their point of contact is. We also want to make sure that they have a lot of resources and materials at the ready, because especially if they're a first timer, they're probably going to have a lot of questions. So I always like to provide a lot of resources in different formats because people like to receive information in different ways. Some people really love a good long handbook that they can just read through for hours. Other people like really short videos. Kitten Lady has some really great videos. There's also really other great resources out there. But just making sure that they have something. And if they've never bottle fed or stimulated a kitten and they have bottle babies, make sure we're doing a live demo before they leave us. So that way if they have any questions, they've had some hands-on experience, they know what it looks like, and they get that experience before they leave us. We also want to make sure that, again, we're establishing a point of contact and any kind of potential levels of emergency procedure. This is what's up on the screen as an example. It doesn't have to be as in-depth as this, but just something where they know when to contact you and how to contact you. Because especially for a first timer who doesn't know what they're doing, they're going to be really concerned probably about everything from eye discharge, vomiting, diarrhea, even just to a kitten having sniffles. And so we want to make sure that they know what that process looks like and that they have those answers. They know what's an emergency and what can wait till morning, right? And to kind of combat some of those issues, we also want to make sure we're doing a check-in within the first 24 hours. This is that transition period, and it's often going to be when people have the most questions. They're settling in, they're just kind of getting everyone comfortable, and maybe they got home and they forgot half of what we talked to them about. And so if we kind of contact them first, we're breaking that ice, which makes them a lot more comfortable to connect with us if they have questions later. And make sure that we have issues solved and sorted out before they become too large. I had a shelter where they had a gentleman who was fostering a mom and kittens for the first time, and they didn't check in with him until about 2 weeks later when they were reaching out for booster vaccines, and they found out that he had actually let mom go after the first couple of days because he was having such a hard time with her, and he was really struggling with those kittens, and it was just a really negative experience for him, and he wanted to give the kittens back before they were ready for adoption. And so that's kind of an extreme example, right? But that's something that could have been avoided if maybe we had kind of had more communication up front with him. And then last but not least, with diversion, the best thing that we can do for our fosters is also allow them to be adoption ambassadors. So these are the people who know these kittens best, and so we want to make sure that they're a part of the adoption process because they're going to be able to get those kittens into homes safely and quickly. And so if we can keep them in foster homes until they're adopted, that keeps them out of the shelter even longer, and that's great for us. So making sure that our fosters have all the pictures and the photos and the names and the bios, we can do courtesy posts for them. That's really great. They have a network, as Leah was talking about. Everyone has some kind of network, so let them rely on that to try to reach out. I have fosters available for adoption, please contact me, and allow them to facilitate that, because if we let them take a part of that process, it really saves us a lot of time, and it's good for everyone. It's good for us because we're not getting the kittens back. It's good for the kittens because they're going from one home directly into another. It's great for the adopter because they're making that contact with the foster who knows that animal best if they have any questions, and it's wonderful for the foster because they're now getting a sense of closure because they're helping ensure that their kittens are going into their new homes, and they may be able to establish a form of contact for future updates and things like that. So we all win when we let our fosters be adoption ambassadors.
All right, and so we're going to go into the last part of diversion and really the most ultimate form of diversion, and that is focus, trap, neuter, vaccinate, return. So we've been talking all about kittens. There is something called kitten season, as I'm sure everyone in this room is aware of. If you live in a state like Florida, it might be all year round, basically. But when it gets warmer, the cats and a mom and dad cat really love each other. They have a litter of kittens. Someone finds that litter of kittens and they're like, I'm gonna be a good Samaritan and bring it to my local shelter, because that's what I've been taught to do, only everyone has the same idea. So we're getting inundated for kittens all over the place. And the thing is, mom and dad are still there. They still love each other, and so we're getting more litters of kittens from the same location. People are finding those kittens. They're like, I brought them to the shelter last time. Why don't I just do that again? And we're in this unending cycle. And so the question is, how do we end this cycle? And the answer to that is something I like to call the friends and family plan. We know where there is a litter of kittens that there is a mom, a dad, an uncle, aunt, friends of the family, cousins, and we want to get them all fixed because we don't want to keep getting litters from the same location again and again. And so data is one of the strongest tools that we have. And when we utilize data in combination with our sterilization resources to get cats TNR'd from focused locations, we find that intake decreases at shelters with comprehensive community cat programming that includes this type of targeted work. And so we want to make sure that we're looking at our data, we're identifying where are we getting litters of kittens from, and we are being more specific than zip code. Zip code targeting is not specific enough to see an impact on your intake. It needs to be as specific as the addresses where these kittens are coming from again and again. Additionally, we're going to be utilizing the information that we get on our intake forms that are relevant. If I have 2 litters of kittens come in and I have limited surgery spots that week, if I look through this intake form and I have one location that has 20 cats versus another location that has 3 cats, I'm likely going to try and get that location with 20 cats fixed first. That other one is still going to be on my list, but I'm going to get the location that's likely to generate me the most intakes quickly, so that I'm really maximizing my resources to see that impact at my front desk. So I have bandwidth to do more of that work, but also work in other programs too. And so with focused trap, neuter, vaccinate, return, we really are practicing intake diversion in its best form, because we're stopping litter after litter of kittens being born at these same locations where we're seeing cats from. And we're also putting other resources into those locations in addition to sterilization, such as giving them best practices for caregiving and resolving nuisance concerns, and really comprehensive solutions so we don't keep getting cats from these addresses, and we are addressing everyone in the community with the resources and information that we have. So that wraps up our presentation. We have 3, thank you. So we have 3 minutes for questions. I will say, if you guys have extra questions and we don't get time, we'll hang out in the hallway for a little bit so you guys can talk to us there, but we probably have time for like 1 or 2 questions if we want to throw the microphone around.
If you want to come to the mic in the center of the room.
Yes,
might
don't throw the microphone. I thought it was the square box, but if you'd like to come up to the mic, please do. We're being recorded, so if, we just want to make sure people who are listening can hear your excellent question.
Someone else's question for like 3 hours. So for the family and friends plan, because I think that's hilarious, we're currently not able to offer a TNVR program because of the laws in North Carolina. So we kind of have an agreement with some rescue groups and things like that. Is there any recommendations you may have as far as encouraging the people within that community to maybe help or get those feral animals fixed rather than through a private sector rather than the county government, because we're not able to provide that yet?
Yeah, so like a few different thoughts. Regardless of whether or not there's a TNVR program in place, we still don't want the kittens going into even like a rescue necessarily until they're big enough because of their underdeveloped immune systems. And so whether or not they're going through TNVR or they're going to be adopted in the future, we want to make sure that they're old enough before they get to that sterilization process. And so I'd really just connect with those rescues in the community as well as people and just talk about still the same talking points that we're talking about, how the kittens really, we want them to keep them with mom. If the goal is for them to be adopted, we want to make sure, they know socialization practices since they need to be socialized before like 8 weeks. That's the typical socialization period. But whether they're being adopted or going through TNVR, we can still connect them to those sterilization resources. And if they keep them outside or they bring them inside, it's completely up to them. What about you, Alesha? Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have partnerships, also just like being really transparent and communicating that proactively to the community so that they're aware of that. If they can do in lieu of intake services, that's really helpful. But the community just needs to know about it. So as long as your relationships are comfortable with you talking about it, that's a really great way to like inform people. Go elsewhere, please.
Yes. All right.
And I see we have time's up in the back, so I think that's going to be
Okay.
our only question. But we will be out in the back if anyone has questions or wants to chat about anything. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.